What's going on, guys? This is Rob. It's 1 o'clock in the morning and I'm recording this audio. And we are covering Absolute Flash. So this story is really interesting. And one of the cool things about it that a lot of you guys are going to enjoy is that Wally West is the main Flash of this comic. Because a lot of people were a bit out of shape when the New 52 launched and Barry was the main Flash, so this isn't really the problem anymore. The other cool thing about this is it picks up with Wally when he's relatively young, right? He's about 15 years old. Now, the thing about this is that at the time, he already has his abilities, but he doesn't know how to harness or control them because there's no one to teach him how to use his powers. Those of you guys who know the history of Wally, you understand what that means. We'll get to the importance of that when we get to the end of this story. So the thing about this is that it all kind of picks up a couple days ago. And by and large, the mannerisms of Wally as he's given to us is that he's very much a loner, which is in stark contrast to the Wally West that we know from the main DC universe. He has his quirks, has his little things, but Wally's one of these guys where instead of always trying to prove himself, instead of always trying to demonstrate the fact that he's a capable Flash, that was one of the big elements of his character's development during the Mike Baron run, which was what happened immediately after the events of Crisis on Infinite Earths back in the 80s, going into Mark Waid's legendary Flash run, right? Always trying to prove that he's every bit as capable as Barry, both to himself and to the people around him, even though he never really needed to. But this version of Wally is just kind of on his own, doing his own thing out there in the world. And he does have a family, and we're going to pick up with him here in a second. But a lot of what he says are some pretty dark things, right? You're completely and totally alone. I knew it was only a matter of time. Things had been okay for a little while, but I could feel it coming on again. It always starts in my stomach like this terrible, low-level, uneasy feeling that begins to spread. And then I know it's starting again. The racing thoughts, obsessive overthinking. She used to catch it early. She used to make me relax, help me calm down, but she's gone. It's just me now. I don't need anyone else anyway. In the end, we're all alone. Other people just mess everything up. When it's just me, I have control. Total control. And so what you're talking about here, right, is hyper independence, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. It really kind of depends on, whether or not it causes you problems, truth to tell. And at the same time, you're talking about him dealing with anxiety. And that's something that I think is really cool and interesting about his character, writing a version of Wally that identifies with what a lot of young people struggle with in this day and age, heightened levels of anxiety and stress. And so combining these two things together, you're going to end up with a person that is very much alone. Stress and anxiety coupled with the fact that Wally feels like he doesn't need anybody. And so he's like, just breathe and keep going. Now, eventually he gets back to Fort Fox, this military base. And as he gets there, a couple of guards are like, hey man, your dad's going to kill you for being out that late. And then Barry Allen shows up. Now, this is one of the big differences between the history of Wally in DC Comics and the main DC universe and his relationship with Barry Allen and what's going on here. Right, initially, when you had Wally introduce as Kid Flash in DC Comics prior to Crisis on Infinite Earths, his origin story was essentially identical to Barry's, right? He was struck by lightning, doused with chemicals, or actually it was the opposite, doused with chemicals, struck by lightning, and then became Kid Flash, only to find out that the superhero that he idoled, the Flash, was actually his uncle, Barry Allen, kind of his uncle-in-law, if there was such a thing. And so, of course, they became superhero and sidekick, and the stories continued on until Barry was believed to be dead during Crisis on Infinite Earths, and then Wally became the new Flash. But what you're talking about here is a scenario where they don't really have that connection, right? They don't have the Iris and Barry connection that they traditionally have. At least there'll be no indication of that over the course of this story. And I kind of like that twist. I like the idea that Barry's not some kind of forensic scientist or anything like that. He's just a science guy that works at a military base, and he's a friend to Wally, right? He's like, look, man, we'll keep this between us, but do you want to see something really cool? Like, do you want to see something that we're working on? And so Wally's like, sure, right? And then Barry takes him to this facility. Now, it's really awesome the way this works, right? He's like, so did your dad tell you anything about what we're working on here at Fort Fox? And that's where Wally's like, no, he and I don't really talk about his work very much. In fact, we don't really talk about anything at all. And he's like, ever since mom died, he and I don't really have a whole lot in common. And that's where Barry's kind of like, my dad and I are basically the same way, right? That kind of thing. And so he brings Wally into the room and he's like, this is Project Olympus. And the question that Wally has is like, what are you working on down here? And that's where he says, like, Project Olympus is something that I can't tell you everything that's going on, but we're working on the very razor's edge of physics and biology. I'm not going to lie, it's the military, so the mandate's obviously weapons development and so on and so forth, but it's only the beginning. Where we can go from here, it's limitless. This is groundbreaking stuff. Now, references to Project Olympus is one of the things that makes this cool, because clearly this is a reference to Vazan the Invincible. That's not true, and I don't even know how many of you guys know of that character. He's super obscure, and he's kind of goofy. This, I would argue, is a reference to Earth 2. Why? Well, because the Earth 2 line of comics from the New 52 is a line of comics where, like in issue number 1, Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman all die. And so basically, like, the superheroes, kind of the leftovers, end up becoming the new version of the Justice League in that universe. It was really, really awesome until you got to the second series. And then it just got really weird with World's End and kind of fell off, depending on, who you're talking to. But the cool thing about it is that at that time, while it was technically Jay Garrick, he ended up coming across Mercury, the Roman equivalent to the Greek god Hermes, who was essentially dying, right? Messenger of the gods. But that's how Flash, following the events of the first issue of Earth 2, got his powers. So it's a cool little throwback, right? A cool little reference here. But Barry kind of continues on as Wally ultimately has to leave and get back home, right? Because he says, look, I'm glad I ran into you. Like I said, you're really, really smart, smarter than that stupid school that they have you in. So like, you should come work with me part-time. And initially Barry likes the idea, right? But he's like, look, man, I don't really know if my dad's going to be on board. And Barry's just kind of like, no, you're good, man. Like, I'll talk to your dad. I'm sure he'll understand. And that's where Rudy shows up and is like, actually, I won't, right? And at that point, one of the things that seems to go on here is that, of course, Rudy is effectively the superior of Barry, but the relationship between Wally and Rudy is a lot more tense than we initially thought. It's one thing when you have a strained relationship where you just don't really talk to your dad. It's another where you just hate the situation that you're in and you see your father as the reason for it. There's a lot of yelling that actually goes on between these two, but it's not necessarily because Rudy's any kind of an abusive father or anything like that. It's actually genuine concern for the welfare of his son, because he tells Barry, civilians are not permitted in here, right? You know that. And where Barry's like, look, Colonel, take a chill, showing that Rudy's clearly a military guy. At the end of the day, he's like, mind your business, right? Like, you're lucky I don't report this. Wally, go home. And so following that, you pick up the next day. And that's where Rudy comes back and you kind of get to see the more gentler side of him, right? You realize he's not really this terrible guy. That again, this genuine concern is rooted in the fact that while he can't necessarily tell Wally everything that's going on out there, he can tell him that what's being done in Project Olympus is an incredibly dangerous thing. And Wally being a part of it puts him in danger. And that while this is his job, at the end of the day, it's also his job to keep his son safe. And that's where Wally lashes out. Now, one of the things to keep in mind is that Wally is 15 years old, right? He's young, he's full of angst. That's at the time in your life when you want all the freedoms and the benefits of being an adult, right? All the independence, but you don't want to have any of the responsibilities that come along with it. And then reality hits you like a ton of bricks and you realize it doesn't work that way. And so you do get a lot of that pushback, right, in your teenage years where you're pushing barriers and so on and so forth. But for Wally, it's a little bit different because it's not simply just the angst of being a teenager, right, just fueled by hormones, having no idea who you are, where you're going, what you're about, what you want your life to look like, or any of that stuff, just kind of feeling lost in the world. It's compounded by the fact that he is quite literally lost in the world, that his dad just moves him around all the time because he's a military brat, and that at the end of the day, he doesn't really have the ability to form any meaningful friendships because no friendship that he ever forms is ever going to last for any measure of time. Hence the reason why he has become such a loner. Couple that with the fact that he was never really taught how to effectively handle his anxiety and stress, mean that instead of him controlling those elements, his anxiety and stress control him. So he's left to the whims of these things that he struggles with. And so at the end of the day, there's a lot of back talk here, but it's also the idea of him saying, like, at least Barry shows some interest in me, right? At least he's interested in what it is that I have to offer. And he realizes that I'm a pretty smart guy, right? He sees some potential. And so, of course, he ends up storming out of the house as most teenage kids do. But of course, he also says things that teenage kids say, right? Thinking emotionally in the moment, not really paying attention to what you're saying. And he's like, if mom were still alive, we'd have both left you a long time ago. And just kind of bails out. At that point, he travels back to Fort Fox, where Barry is, and finds Barry in the midst of an experiment. And Barry just starts shouting at him, right? Like, get away, like, get out of here, run as fast as you can. And so that's when you pick up in the here and now. And what you have is with Wally running and his powers kind of popping in and out without his ability to control them, he's actually being chased down by the Absolute Universe version of the Rogues, which is cool. For those of you guys who are not familiar with The Flash, I don't know anybody who's not, given how popular the TV show was, the Rogues are basically just like the enemies of The Flash, right? So Captain Cold looks particularly cool. I do love Boomerang. He looks really, really awesome. All these guys are really like modern and updated, and the kind of characters that you would expect if you're looking at Rogues that are being given to us in an alternate reality, separate from the ones that we're traditionally used to. But as soon as Wally realizes he's being chased, he's immediately on the run again. And so that's when you pick up with him running through this cave. And he says, calm down, breathe, Wally, just breathe. And he's like, you've messed everything up. This is all your fault. You can run all you want. It'll never be far enough. You know what you did. And that's where you kind of get this glimpse where like he reaches out to Barry while Barry's in this whole huge machine type thing. And you end up realizing Barry's dead. Seemingly, Wally killed Barry. We don't know how, we don't even know why. But what you do end up picking up with is somebody who just kind of appears in what used to be the facility where Barry's powers seemingly manifested and where Wally ultimately got the abilities of the Flash. And this guy just says, access to Project Olympus archives requested, password Blue Trinity. Now, Blue Trinity is fascinating in DC Comics. Blue Trinity is an old school concept, and it's amazing that Jeff Lemire reached out to this. Blue Trinity and Red Trinity were both superhero teams that were based out of Russia. It was composed of 3 people. It was the Soviet Union back then. But each team had 3 people, hence the name Trinity. The blue team was designed to defeat the Flash. The red team was designed to help the Flash. So it was kind of a cool callback to these 2 things. But the computer starts to hum alive, right? Starts to come to life, and it's just like access granted, retrieving archives. And basically it goes through this entire experiment with like Barry and everything, showing all the information that was documented, and seemingly Wally gaining his powers for the first time. So what it looks like here is between the experiment and Wally having supposedly killed Barry, there was some time there, right? There was a bit of passage, right? Obviously not too much time because Wally hasn't changed that much. But this guy says, mirror, mirror on the wall, time to make this whole world fall. It's Mirror Master, right? So again, it's cool and it's fun. I will say the first issue doesn't quite feel like it has the gravitas of the other Absolute comics so far, but it is Jeff Lemire, and Jeff Lemire never disappoints. So I'm excited to see where this goes. But with that being said, guys, we're going to bring this to an end. Thank you guys for watching. Let me know what you think down in the comments, and I will catch you all later. Peace.